Welcome, welcome, welcome. And yes, we did have some technical difficulties, but you're listening to KHTS AM 1220, and that's all. Eventually, we will be 98.1 FM, but we're not now. And we have a great show today, and as everyone can see, we have the lovely Miss Lindsay Mann.
Hi, Brien. Thanks for having me.
So great to have you back. You were out on assignment. That's why we have all the guests that we have, because Lindsay's out on assignment seeking talent. And if you believe that you have the talent to be on the Ask Brien Radio Show, Lindsay Mann is the person to go see, because she's the one who gets all the talent to get onto the Ask Brien Radio Show.
That's right.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
And is our guest there?
I am here, yes.
Okay, it's a little scrubbly, so not sure what that is. But, Brien, so I wanted to ask you a couple questions. First of all, before we get started, everyone, this is the Ask Brien Radio Show. It's ASKBRIEN, because that's the only way to spell Brien, although I know that Brien spells it without an E, but that's just a misnomer here right now. But we have a great guest, Brien Marks. And Brien, let's go over a little bit about your background. So my understanding is you've been quite successful in your business career. So let's go over the first business that you started.
Sure. I'm going to assume you mean my adult businesses, and I hope to talk about some childhood experiences later. But started my first real company in 1981. We were in the ethnic hair care business with a brand called Always Natural. We eventually came out with a brand called African Pride. And I'm condensing 17 years because in 1998 we were fortunate enough to sell that business to Revlon. And I went to work there for a couple of years as the president of Revlon Ethnic Products Worldwide. And I left Revlon in the year 2000, had a couple of years left on my non-compete, and we came back with a brand called Dr. Miracles, which also was a multicultural brand. Had great success with that one, 4.5 years, close to $40 million in sales, and we sold the majority of that company to a private equity player. And I'm back now with a brand called My Israel's Miracle that we're very excited about. We have that myisraelsmiracle.com, and we're on Amazon, literally for about 6 weeks. So that's a brand new enterprise that we feel very good about. And that's, some of my business success and career.
So, Brien, one thing is we have had some technical difficulties here, so it is getting a little difficult in sound. So if you could do us a favor, make sure you're talking clearly into your phone, and then it's on a landline, because we do have some technical difficulties. I apologize for that.
Sure.
Okay. So, question for you. How do you start a company? You started a company, and you were able to sell that, I think you said, to Revlon. How do you start a company that becomes so valuable that you can sell it to Revlon? I mean, I'm just trying to sell, $100,000 worth of business, and you're out there selling multi-million dollars. How do you go from 0 to 10 million?
Well, I think the answer is, and that brand, I'm proud to say, reached about $35 million in sales that we sold to Revlon. And I think one of the answers, and there are many, many answers, one of the answers that I would say your audience should be very interested in is intellectual property. And it's something that we overlook as businessmen early in our careers. We don't want to spend the money on trademarks, maybe patents. We don't realize how important they are. But when you ask me what Revlon really bought from me, and I had a business and I had product I was selling, to all the major retailers and many, many, many export customers as well. But at the end of the day, what they were buying was a brand name, and actually 4 brand names: African Pride, Always Natural, Ginseng Miracle, and 911, which was a brand we had back then. And that is what a lot of the big companies are interested in. They want brand names, they want intellectual property that is clean, and they want something that they think they can put their expertise on and grow. And that's the big issue also. They want to look forward and think growth is part of the picture.
Well, but I'm more interested in building the brand name, because obviously intellectual property is very important. People don't know this, but I actually have a law office that handles intellectual property issues like trademarks.
Great.
And so the issue is, applying for trademarks, and applying for patents, applying for copyrights, that absolutely has a lot of value to any company. But it's building that brand name again. The name didn't mean anything. 911 or the other company names that you mentioned, they didn't mean anything. It meant what you did to that company to build that business. This wasn't the patented part of it. This was the trademark part of it. The trademark part of it is the brand name. That's something that you had to build up. Just like I always tell people, in 1940, McDonald's meant nothing. Apple was a fruit before 1970. Okay? Coca-Cola didn't mean anything 150 years ago. The reality is it's what the company does with that name to build up that brand name. Now, you're telling me that your greatest asset was this intellectual property, but how did you get it to be that valuable?
Sure, and again, I think any honest businessman is going to say there were so many factors. But let me say something else to you. When I mention intellectual property and a brand name, there's another element, and I'm glad you're pushing me on this a little bit. The other element is an emotional connection to the consumer, and that's something that I don't want to say you either have it or you don't. You have to build it up. I can talk to you about certain marketing techniques, but African Pride came out in the year 1991. We were in the middle of a complete Afrocentric movement in the country. Here in New York City, we saw many women walking around with kente cloth. We saw a tremendous interest in Afrocentric education, poetry, music, things like that. And we really rode the wave on that. Now, the original brand that we had back in 81 was Always Natural. And that was a natural brand. We used herbs and natural ingredients. We did not have the emotional connection to the consumer with Always Natural that we had with African Pride. So that made it a lot easier. The other interesting thing to discuss is distribution, being able to access distribution. Today, hey, with My Israel's Miracle, we're going e-commerce, our technique, but back in the day of African Pride, it didn't exist. So being able to access retail distribution, another big factor. So when I talk to other businessmen, sometimes they do what I call the ooh-ooh factor. They take their product, they hold it out, and they say ooh-ooh. And they don't think about things like emotional connection to consumer, and they don't think about things like distribution. But you can't order something if it's not on the menu.
Well, I'll have to remember that the next time I go to that restaurant.
Exactly.
If I can't order it. Now, what is this? What was that ginseng product? Because what's interesting about that is that's kind of a natural herb concept here, and especially in the early 90s. I mean, nowadays, yes, everybody's into that organic herbal stuff, but ginseng in the 90s, I mean, how did you come up with that product, and when did you come up with that product?
Well,
by the way, Lindsay has a question about that. She'll be asking.
Oh, good. And ginseng, interestingly enough, we had always been involved with the health food industry, using them as an incubator. And if you talk about the health food market and you go way back, aloe vera, jojoba oil, granola bars, they were not mainstream. They were in the health food market. So I began to notice a proliferation of ginseng products, everything from taking it internally to creams, gums, lotions, teas, and that's really where the Ginseng Miracle concept came from. And when we did presentations to retailers, we took all of those different types of ginseng products, we kept them on the table, actually covered up with a sheet, did our presentation, described all of these items, and explained how ginseng had great acceptance among consumers and great awareness. And you're right, it was a little premature to the whole holistic movement, herbal movement, but we got a lot of interest on ginseng. And I'll say something else, if you can picture it on the radio, we came out with somewhat provocative advertising as well back then, a little bit pushing the edge compared to the market at the time, and we did that because we wanted attention. But ginseng was a middle-of-the-road brand for us. Our game changer was African Pride at that time.
And when did you come up with that ginseng product?
Ginseng was mid-'90s, 94 or 95.
And would you consider that ginseng product today to be mainstream now?
Well, I would say ginseng is mainstream. As far as our product and it being used in the hair field, it's certainly being used, but I wouldn't say in hair care it's mainstream. I would say overall the ingredient is certainly mainstream at this point.
Lindsay?
My question is, Brien, hi.
Hi.
We always like to educate our guests on, how business owners got started in their industry. So
Yes.
I'd like for you, if you can, cover, how did you start out? How did you get into this? And how did you start a company?
Sure. I mean, I'm now going to go back to what I said earlier, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I'm a very passionate believer in jobs for young people, businesses for young people, and opportunities to understand how the marketplace works for young people. And I trace a lot of my success back to literally a paper route I had when I was 10 or 11. That doesn't exist anymore. I drove around on my bicycle and delivered and collected the money. Today, adults are in cars doing those jobs. I was a waiter for 6 or 7 years. I had a mentor that I sought out, was the owner of the restaurant, and he took me under his wings, explained a lot of things to me. The actual beginning of the African Pride business was my father meeting another father whose son had just fooled around with one product and a couple of health food stores in Brooklyn, and we got together. We invested less than $10,000 for 50% share in that company. I bought that partner out 7 or 8 years later, and it's really been an interesting experience. And as you go along, and I always do think it's important for young business people to have some of the things that you don't know: accounting, legal, as Brien said, someone who handles your intellectual property. So there's no one real answer, but I would say I trace my business success to things that are not available to most kids today.
Right. How many people did you have starting out in your company? How many people did you hire? And in the beginning, did people were you able to pay people salaries?
Well, it's a good question. In the beginning, it was my partner and myself alone. We began hiring some part-time help, and they were mostly women who were returning to the workplace. We got along with that for a year or two and then began to hire our first full-time employees. So it was a slow process. African Pride, just before we sold it, we topped out at 98 employees, direct employees. So it was a process for sure.
If you can go back and change anything, what would it be?
Being on the Ask Brien show right away.
I would say the one thing, I would make sure the electricity was on out there by you guys. No, I'm kidding. But, without all the ins and outs of it, there's part of me that would say I would change my first partner because, again, I don't think there's enough time to talk about legal issues and drug issues. And I mean, I actually had, like in a movie, a nightmare partner. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be where I am today without him. So I know this sounds a little bit corny, but it's really true from the heart. All the trials and tribulations and ups and downs that I've gone through as an entrepreneur, I wouldn't have really changed much of those at all.
Right, right. Would you consider yourself to be an investor as you buy into businesses, or have you ever sought any investment money?
Well, the only investment money we sought, and I don't even know if you would call it investment money. I mean, we had two sales, investment bankers. We put a book out. We did that whole process. We certainly borrowed a little bit of money from the bank along the way, but it was very interesting. In our businesses over the years, the bank always said, we wish we could lend you more money because we didn't have this model where we said we can lose money for 5 years. We, within 12 to 18 months, started to go cash flow positive, and that had to do with our gross profit and things like that. So no real investors. When I sold the business to Revlon, I was 100% owner. At the time, I didn't realize what that meant, but that was something that was very unusual, and it would be even more so today, I think.
It's always like the chicken and the egg, right? The investors want you to have, an obscene amount of numbers, whether it's members, to be able to consider even thinking about investing in your company, and you have to somehow figure out how to pull magic tricks out of your hat. It seems like so. Yeah,
that's
why the product is called Miracle.
Exactly. Listen, the main thing is, in many young entrepreneurs I coach and mentor, they all have the money issue, and they all have an ability to sell some equity early on. And I try my best to say, please wait as long as you can. And, some people, and I'm sure you know this, some people use the credit cards for a period of time. Friends and family is a big thing that people do. And if you're blessed enough, when we started My Israel's Miracle, we were able to fund it ourselves and get it going. But as long as you are a young entrepreneur, if it's successful, let's say it that way, if it's showing success, if it's showing growth, try not to sell out that equity too soon, because you may regret that in a few years down the line.
Right. You said you did a book. Now, did you? Was this book just recently, and did you have it on iTunes books or Amazon books?
No, I'm sorry. I'm a little. The book you're referring to, which book? I'm sorry.
Just whatever books that you've written.
Okay, I haven't written a book at all. I'm more of an operator, and I've certainly had many times people said, "Hey, you should write a book," but I've never done that, honestly. I do more coaching one-on-one. I'm out there with friends, family, neighbors. I had a gentleman today come and see me who has primarily an internet business, interested in thinking about selling it. We sat down. We went over some experiences I've had in the past. So no book, but seems like I could probably write a book.
It was my misunderstanding. I thought it was you were marketing something. So what is your favorite social platform channel to use for your business?
Well, I'm a little bit. It's funny, and I'm the first to admit it. I'm an old brick and mortars guy. With when we had African Pride and Dr. Miracles, we had 50,000 doors in the U.S. and we had chain-wide, everyone from Walmart to Walgreens, Rite Aid at the time, CVS. So now, some people, and the best way to answer your question, when we were in development of My Israel's Miracle. And I'd love to give you guys some more details on that. But when we were in development of that product, many people who know me said, "Oh, you're going back to retail." And I said, "No, I'm not." And they were very surprised. And the reasons we didn't go back to retail have to do with what's happening in the marketplace. The stores closing. The demands are becoming greater and greater on young entrepreneurs from some of these retailers. There's one retailer I won't mention by name that has gone to a 6-month payment on the first order if they accept your products. So we took the position with My Israel's Miracle that, hey, we want to go someplace where we can have a proof of concept, which is Amazon. And I will tell you honestly, in the 2 months we're dealing with Amazon, actually less, it is like another universe.
Right.
It's another world. It's another platform, different language. And here I am, a guy doing this 35 years, I'm learning all over. But we do find it fascinating with the ability to go directly to the consumers as opposed to going through either a distributor to get to a retailer to get to the consumer. And we do hope to take that product, My Israel's Miracle, right to the retailers after we have a track record and some good metrics.
Okay, you just said that Amazon is a different universe. Explain.
Well, listen, I could start with the language, okay? I think the one word in my experience, and absolutely no expert, the word algorithm, okay? I'm used to dealing with a buyer, and I call the buyer on the phone. I send the buyer an email. I go and make a presentation to the buyer and to her staff. And none of that exists with Amazon whatsoever. And anyone that's an expert on Amazon that's honest will tell you they understand it, but they don't ever say they understand 100% because in a day or two, a lot of the algorithm changes. We've all heard the horror stories of Amazon coming out with a copy of your product or going around you, or all of a sudden your listing changes. So it's really, Brien, from soup to nuts, a complete way of getting to the consumer that really is different than anything we've ever dealt with before, including the fact that there are 110 million Prime members who can push the button and have that product in their house the next day. I mean, that's really revolutionary, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So does this change your view on moving forward?
Well, it does, because initially with all our other brands, we started early in the 80s. Back in 81, we sold health food stores. That was our first foray into retail. That took us into some distributors who sold to retail, and that eventually took us into mass distribution throughout the country. Amazon, for us, again, with the product My Israel's Miracle, is a proof of concept. We want to be able to go, and we have good contacts with the chain accounts because we've done nothing but make money with them over the years. So we want to be able to go and see a person like Walgreens and or Walmart, Sally, Ulta, and say, hey, here's what we're doing on Amazon. Here's our numbers. Here's our success. We also, as a auxiliary, have a PR firm. That's why I'm on your show today. We have some social media people working in-house for us as well. So we're really trying to polish up our apple, so to speak, and present it to those retailers when we think the time is appropriate.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Finding the right lawyer can be a challenge, but in Santa Clarita, there's no need to search when there's Hacker Law Group, Santa Clarita's premier litigation firm. Jeffrey Hacker has represented celebrities, financial institutions, accident victims, real estate developers, realtors, contractors, businesses, nonprofit organizations, and other individuals and companies with their legal challenges. Mr. Hacker is one of Santa Clarita's leaders, consistently listed as one of our most influential. When everything is on the line and you need legal counseling, visit hackerlawgroup.com.
If you have a business problem, if someone doesn't honor their agreement and you need an aggressive attorney with over 27 years experience, the Law Office of Peter Bronstein has helped partners resolve disputes, franchisees resolve disputes, and other business owners who have a challenge. Let the Law Office of Peter Bronstein take your stress away. Visit lacorporateattorney.com. Don't wait too long and lose your rights. Solve your business challenge problem today. Visit lacorporateattorney.com.
Santa Clarita luxury car owners are discovering Infinity of Valencia.
Infinity of Valencia? Where's that?
Infinity of Valencia, your gateway to luxurious driving, owns a state-of-the-art dealership in front of Valencia Auto Row.
Why haven't I seen it?
Infinity of Valencia can easily be seen as you drive on Magic Mountain Parkway opposite the Valencia Town Center.
Oh, in front of Auto Row?
Auto Row is behind Infinity of Valencia. Infinity of Valencia. Discover it in front of Auto Row.
So easy to find.
Hometown, your hometown station.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show, spelled with an E. AskBrien. That's the only way to spell Ask Brien, affiliated with the AskBrien.com website. And we have my co-host, Lindsay Mann.
Hi, thanks.
And our special guest, Mr. Brien Marks. Brien, you there?
I'm here, Brian.
That's correct. Even though it's conflicting with our EN, I'll allow it. So that was very interesting about that Amazon concept. How do you find... So I still want to go back to the original part. You're starting out, you spend 10 grand or 20 grand, you're getting a store or a company set up. Okay, how do you get to millions and millions of dollars? That sounds to me, everybody puts up 10 grand and they try to get their idea developed and make it millions. And out of that group, there's a very small percentage of people that get there. What did you do you think, that made it there? And how could people do that today? And give us your secret formula without giving away all your secrets.
I wish I had a secret formula. We all know Albert Einstein once said success is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration.
Well, I perspire a lot, so that's good.
Yeah, well, then you're going to be successful. But that quote was always in my mind. There's something else I would say, and let's see how you react to it. I had fear that motivated me. So what was fear? I was a 25-year-old. I had left a job at Motorola, which was considered a great entry-level job and exciting, Fortune 500. Motorola was a hot company back then. And I was going through a divorce. from my first wife. And my father comes to me and says, you need to talk to this guy. And I eventually do, and we get started. So I had fear of failure. I had fear of not paying my bills. I had fear of not being a success. And I always tell people, I had this conversation with one of my sons the other day who's a basketball player. And I just said, fear can do two things. It can either paralyze you and you cannot move and you cannot act, or it can motivate you. So fear was a big motivation for me. And I'll mention something else that probably most of your entrepreneurs out there don't want to hear. And that's that whatever your product is, whatever your service is, nobody really needs it. Nobody really wants it. And nobody really cares. And it's a shock to say that, but if you don't say that, then you believe your own PR, your own BS, and you're not going to be effective. So, I'll just tell you, in the last 12 months developing this new product, My Israel's Miracle, we brought special things in from Israel. We'll maybe talk about that later. But I've had that conversation with my small staff, and I always start small. Hey, let's not think anyone's out there waiting for us, because they're not. The other thing I could say to you, Brien, is today we as consumers have an infinite amount of choices. It's really mind-boggling to think of the amount of information, messages, come-ons we get, not on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. So we have to find a way to just keep pushing. I will say this to you also. African Pride in 1991, within about 18 months, was off to the races. That became a $25 million brand in 3 years. Always Natural, in 10 years, was an $8 million brand. So I went through the two experiences, the one where the consumer accepted the product fairly quickly, one where they didn't really understand it. So that was just going back to the old 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration.
So, did you say 25 million in 3 years and then 8 million later on? I don't understand.
No, 8 million was always Natural from 1981 to 1991. 10 years, that brand went up to 8 million from scratch, and that was good. We had a nice little company. But African Pride began in 1991, and within 3 years was a $25 million brand. That one took off like a rocket.
And to Revlon, did you sell both those companies?
Yes, both. It's brands, both brands, and Ginseng and 911. They took 4 brands. African Pride was about 85% of the total. I mean, that was really the main thing they were interested in, and that they thought had the legs to go much higher.
And do you know what the revenue is today for that product? I know it's part of Revlon. So.
Well, it's interesting that it's not anymore. It's amazing when you create something and you see what happened. Revlon had it for a few years, quite a few, sold it to a Spanish company who had been in the personal care industry, sold it to a company now in Savannah, Georgia. And African Pride is still active. When I did it, it was a premium brand. They've turned it into more of a budget brand because they own a factory. It's about a $20 million brand at Walmart still. The other 3 brands are alive, but barely. I'll say it that way.
And what is 911?
911, and again, when you mention that name, and, I'm a New Yorker and lived through all this, you don't get it. We had the 911, which is the emergency number. We trademarked that number back in the early 90s, okay? And honestly, I was shocked it was able to be trademarked, but it was just another number.
So am I.
Yeah, and then we had it. We had the TM. The brand was a good brand. We did $3 to $4 million a year with it. Nothing to sneeze at. I don't want to sound that way. But when all of that happened, we went through a package change along the way at Revlon, and the brand really lost a lot of its legs.
But what is the product?
It was a leave-in, primarily leave-in conditioners, water-based leave-in conditioners that the consumer would put onto their hair and not rinse out, use it before styling, It was good for moisturizing, conditioning, and things like that.
I love that product. I use it every day because I have long hair. So.
Okay. Well, I'll send you some My Israel's Miracle at the end if I'm allowed to.
Now,
That'd be wonderful.
what is that product? The Israeli
My
product?
Israel's Miracle, real quick story. For about 15 years, I had that trademark. I had it as Israel's Miracle. I've always been fascinated with that. My belief is, and I've been to Israel 7 times now, energy center of the world. Amazing, amazing energy when you have anybody you ask, and I'd love some of your listeners to try this. You say to someone, have you ever been to Las Vegas? And they say, oh, yeah, it was so much fun. Oh, I saw 2 shows. You ask them if they've ever been to Israel. You usually get a pause, a deep breath, and a lot of times people look up. So I had the trademark for a long time. When I sold to the private equity company, they got all the side trademarks that were not active. That's part of the deal. I never tried to play any, transferring out games. And within a year, they dropped it. So I got it back, and I began the process of coming out with this product. We went to Israel. We made contact with a wonderful herbalist who operates out of a kibbutz in Israel. We came out with a list of herbs that were good for the hair that actually went back thousands of years. We tapped into something called En-Gedi water, which is the oasis in the desert. In the middle of the desert, this little oasis of green and trees and things. And we also found a source for argan oil, which primarily came from Morocco. But we found a source of 200 trees in Israel, argan oil trees. So we started to put that together. Luckily, I will say this part, and this is the part young people, it's hard to duplicate. We had contacts with factories in Chicago for 15, 20, 30 years. We had a great perfumer here in New Jersey that helped us with a fragrance that most consumers find amazing. And came out with 6 SKUs. And, again, I've been on Amazon with My Israel's Miracle for the past 6 weeks. Got a pretty good start. We're happy with it. And it's something different and something really, really wonderful.
Can My Israel's Miracle handle high volume sales?
Yes, I would say yes, and I think I can say that confidently, with the factories I'm using, with the people who supply me with everything from caps to sprayers and things like that. So, yeah, we're absolutely set up for high volume. Having said that, we're very focused on our initial distribution through Amazon, making that successful, and the answer is yes, for sure.
Now, to go back, do you think that you can have Amazon and maybe say like a brick and mortar store, but not necessarily own it, like maybe a connection with Costco?
Costco's a possibility. I will, I'm on the air, and I know we're live, and there's no big secret. I think so. We live in a time where in the old days, you could only be in one class of trade. Let's say if you were a clothing designer, high-end clothing designer. Today, a high-end clothing designer could be an H&M. It's not the same. So we believe probably not Costco. I would say some of our wish list would be maybe Target. Walmart is a possibility for us. And then I mentioned Ulta. Ulta has 800 stores. They are very successful retailer, one of the great success stories in retail in the last few years. And we look at them and say, hey, we think we could do a great job in there. But again, timing is everything. It's the question of when.
How many times have you had to travel to Israel for this product?
That was only once or twice. When we made a contact, I haven't had to go back and forth. We have a great, as I said earlier, herbalist who's putting together our oil-soluble, water-soluble extracts of the organic ingredients that we use. So that hasn't been the case. I'm going to make another trip to Israel probably in the next 60 days or so. And another part of My Israel's Miracle, really I would say our mission is we're not into politics. We're not into religion. But we are into spreading some of the great things about Israel. And, Israel, the size of New Jersey, tiny little country where you can drive from the Dead Sea in the morning up to a mountain and go skiing in the afternoon and then end up in Old Jerusalem. in the evening. So really something amazing that sometimes is not focused on the way it should be.
Absolutely. I've been to Israel. I spent a month there many years ago, and I just think it's truly a magical place. It really is.
Yes. And you know what? I appreciate you saying that. And you probably understand you're not going to meet many people who've been there that don't share your view. Everyone kind of gets it. You almost get it when you land and step on the tarmac for the first time. There's just something that is magical. We say on the packaging, it's a feeling that is truly hard to describe.
Right. And not only that, the food is just out of this world.
Amazing. The food is amazing. What can I say? I just think all of it's amazing, and most Americans, if you say Dead Sea, they may or may not even know that's Israel, by the way. So it's really something that we are trying to spread that word about the great things of Israel. We are trying to encourage people via our myisraelsmiracle.com website. Hey, tell us your great things about Israel. Tell us your experiences. We all know about the negative. We know about the violence. We know about this stuff. And it's there. It's important. But how about focusing on the positive a little bit?
Right. Well, I'm just surprised Israel's been dealing with that for many years, but they still handle it day in, day out, and they go about their lives. And so it is truly amazing, and I totally respect that. So more on it, some personal questions. How do you balance your work and your personal life?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I just turned 64.
Ooh, congrats.
And, and I'm on the radio here, but I'm in great shape. I'm active. I'm busy. I am attempting with this new company to not be as involved second to second, minute to minute. And my previous companies, when I was younger, and again, I'll mention, when that fear factor would kick in, I was on top of every single detail. Now, I have an amazing, amazing partner working with me, a young woman named Marissa Schwartz, who came from Goldman Sachs. She was there for 7 years. She was in their intern program outside of college. And I always kid around and say, why did you leave Goldman Sachs to come work with me? But she did. She saw the opportunity, and she's handling a lot of that day-to-day stuff. The other thing is, I try to combine, I never really looked at life as this is my work life, this is my home life, this is my hobby life, this is my friend life. I honestly never looked at life that way, and I really felt almost a little bad for people whose lives were so compartmentalized. To me, it was all one big life, So even in my offices in the old days, my kids would come, and they'd hang out a little bit. With Dr. Miracles, my current wife was very involved. She was a model for us. She helped us with product formulations, amazing way to look at products, smell products, and feel products. So I think it's important to combine your life into one beautiful life and not say this is this and that's that.
Well, that's great. So, not a lot of people can have that relationship, especially with your spouse, that you can work with them. Some people are like, I have to be on my own and stay away from you.
I understand that as well, and that was a bit of an experiment. Not being involved second to second is a bit of an experiment. And hey, I think we have to all kind of change as we go, make adjustments, be ready to make certain adjustments. And, do things differently and better. Do things better.
Yeah. What are the fundamentals of building a solid foundation, like in business?
Listen, one of them is that horrible thing I said a few minutes ago. Don't believe your own BS and your own PR. Don't do the ooh with your product without answering where you're going to sell it, how much you're going to sell it for, and, who's going to be your distributor, etc. I think that's a key thing. I think numbers don't lie. I'm not an accountant. I don't have a CPA background. But the concept of, we'll make it up in volume, that old joke, it doesn't usually work. Having said that, your first year or two, you're not going to be profitable. We understand that. But the concept of thinking in terms of profit and loss, because really at the end of the day, it's interesting. You guys do this every week. How else do you keep score? It's profit and loss, dollars and cents. And from my own experience, I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who are not focused on some of those fundamentals. One other thing I'll say, if I can, is that concept of knowing what you don't know. I see a lot of young business people say, "Oh, I don't need a lawyer. I don't need an accountant." No, you do. You do. And it's very painful in the beginning. I was there to hire a professional and say, how am I going to pay for this? It doesn't make sense to me. But you got to look. One of my great mentors used to say, don't look down at your shoes. Look out into the horizon.
Beautiful.
Well, that's an interesting concept. I am an accountant and I am an attorney, and
Sorry to hear that.
And I'll tell you right now, the fact of the matter is, you go to the accountant and you go to the attorney in the beginning when you start out your business, and you may pay $1,500, or you can go to the attorney, 4 years later, with a trademark infringement lawsuit, two other lawsuits, and I tell the guy you need a $10,000 deposit. So you can pay me now a little bit, or you can pay me later a lot. So
of course,
I don't have a problem if you want to wait.
Yep. No, I hear you. And listen, it's $10,000 to the attorney and maybe $20 to the IRS, right?
And don't forget if you lose the lawsuit.
Exactly.
No, I'm a firm believer that, not because of my background, that it's a lot easier to fix a problem early on than it is later on.
No question. Question.
So let me ask you a question about your failures, okay? I know you've been very successful, but I've often heard that, to be successful, you have to have a lot of failures, because without those failures, that's what you learn to make you the person you are. So give us one of your failures and how you overcame it and learned from it.
Sure. I'm cringing as you make me discuss this, but to be very serious, yes, I've never met, and I think if you meet an entrepreneur who's fairly successful and says he never had a failure, then disconnect him from the lie detector. But my failures, and this you might find this instructive. My failures had to do, a lot of them, where I was in between these companies. I had sold the company. I had a non-compete. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm also restless, so I've got to be involved. So I'll tell you one quick one, and I'm going to tell you the end of the story right now. The end of the story is my failures were failures, but I did not take the big leap. All right? I got close to the ledge, to the cliff, but I didn't jump. So one of them, there's a couple. I'm going to mention one. After I sold the business to Revlon, I had a concept of a spa in Midtown Manhattan, catering primarily to African-American women. And I liked the idea. I still do, by the way. I did my research, and here's the way I did it. And I think it's instructive, again, with what we're talking about with professionals. I found someone who was a consultant in the spa and health club business. I was introduced to this gentleman. He wanted to do a consulting project for me where he would kind of check my assumptions and, see if I was heading in the right direction. That was at least 15 years ago. That was a $30,000 investment. At the end, and I actually got pretty friendly with this gentleman. I respected him. He certainly knew his business. At the end, he said to me, I don't think you should do it. I said, why not? And he spoke about certain ways I was dressed. I used to wear little fancy suits back in the day and drive fancy cars. He said, you're going to do a spa that's going to cost X, well over $1 million, because you're not going to do it on the cheap. I said, well, you're right about that. He said, let's go over the numbers. Anyway, he did. I did invest quite a bit of time, $30,000 to him, but I didn't go ahead with the project. So it wasn't a success in any way, shape, or form. It was a failure, I say, but it was a modified failure. I didn't go full steam ahead, and that, I think, is the moral of the story. Try to get yourself some information along the way. And again, I don't want it to sound like my mantra, but again, saying to yourself, nobody really needs this. Nobody really cares about this. I try to talk myself really out of things that I invest in, as opposed to talking myself into those things.
And are there any spas catering to African American in Manhattan to this day?
I'm going to be perfectly honest and tell you I didn't follow things as closely then. There were then a few, yes, and I would say there's probably a couple, and that could have to do with certain areas where they're located, etc., certain types of treatments. So, yes, I think there is. I don't think there's a gigantic amount of them, to say it that way.
And how did you come up with that idea?
Well, that idea somehow came out of, my experience with African Pride, Always Natural, etc. And I had really devoted almost 18 years of my life to marketing to the African American community. I thought I was well-versed in that. I had great success in it. So it was an outcrop of African Pride and that sale to Revlon.
Have you ever seen any type of discrimination in the personal care business that you've witnessed?
Are you saying gender discrimination?
Gender, any kind of discrimination for that matter, really.
Well, listen, if you're marketing to any one particular group, well, listen, we're on the radio. I'm a white Jewish kid from Brooklyn, okay? And I discovered something in business and in life. When you're not that successful, nobody cares. When you become successful,
yep.
Everybody cares.
Exactly.
So, I certainly got some blowback from some of my competitors along the way. But it was how do we use everything we have as an advantage, and the same way for me. So that really became the model. I will say when we were Always Natural, and I told you that became an $8 million brand, hey, all the bigger companies, and that was Procter & Gamble, some of the bigger independently owned ethnic companies, everyone was my friend. I was the young, nice kid from Brooklyn. I got advice. I got everyone trying to help me. As soon as that brand, African Pride, took off like a rocket and I was taking market share away from these guys, the whole game changed. So, I didn't really look upon it as discrimination, to be perfectly honest. I just looked upon it as all's fair in love and war. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Did you ever work for a company besides Revlon? I know you worked for Revlon for 2 years, but did you ever work for a big company like that ever again?
I had two experiences working for the Fortune 500 companies. I mentioned Motorola a minute ago. I was 23. That was entry level. And I wasn't there very long before I said, what am I doing here? And then I sold my business to Revlon, and for the first year I was meeting with the CEO and the CFO, and everyone loved everything, and I honestly had the same reaction. What am I doing here? So I would say most entrepreneurs, our makeup, our philosophy, the way we do business is really diametrically opposed to Fortune 500, and that's why we're able to be successful. We're able to do things in a year that takes them 3 years because of the processes and the lawyers and the bureaucracy that they have to deal with.
That's a huge deal. What is your biggest talent?
Wow, that's a great question. Listen, I think I'm for whatever reason, and I've always wondered how or why, concepts, ideas, tend to pop into my head, and that's only step one. I mean, again, Israel's Miracle, my Israel's Miracle, something I've kind of played with for 15 years. So concepts for sure, and I think I'm a motivator. I can say that. I don't want to sound, too full of myself. I think it's good to be humble, but I do think, and I know I've been able to motivate people. I've been able to build a team, large teams in a few cases, and everybody is motivated and everyone is centered towards what we're trying to get done. So I think that's those two things. Concepts are great. If you don't have concepts, you can't do anything, but many people have ideas and concepts and do nothing with them.
Right.
So how do you execute?
I think the real answer to that is, and listen, I've had great success, and I'll mention this again. I don't want to sound anything but humble. I say in my bio, I've sold over $1 billion of product at retail. Now, that's over 25, 30 years, okay? And it's absolutely true, and the number's much, much, much higher than that. But I remember 1981, we had 3 SKUs, always natural. We had a product called Indian hemp, which is an herb that came from Brazil. And we used to go into health food stores and give our pitch. And by the way, in the health food market, they knew what the stuff was. And it always went this way. They say, oh, it's really interesting. When can we get it? And I'd say, in about 30 seconds. We'd go to the car. We'd set it up in the store. And that really, Brien, to me, that summarizes the way you get from 0 to 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 million. Get out and do it. Don't sit there and have analysis paralysis. Don't think of all the reasons. For real, don't think of all the reasons it's not going to be successful, and don't think of all the reasons why you know it's going to be successful. Just get your you-know-what out there and get it in front of people and start selling that product, however you can do it.
So you must love the Nike philosophy.
Nike, it's, again, now you're talking David and Goliath, but it's just do it. I mean, hey, somebody very high-paid advertising genius, and I'm serious about that, in one way came up with that. In the other way, hey, what entrepreneur doesn't understand that? Just do it, for sure.
Well, we got to be going soon, so a couple of things. What is your website, and how can people reach you?
Sure, thank you so much. Well, myisraelsmiracle.com is our website. My Israel's Miracle on Amazon, for sure. And I'm going to tell you, you're asking me how you do it. I'm doing it right now. We need every single person that is interested in Israel, that is fascinated by Israel, that just wants to learn more about Israel. I'm not even asking you today to go and buy the product, but go on Amazon, take a look, and go on our website. And if you have any questions, suggestions, anything, please let us know. We'll be happy to get back in touch with you.
Well, thank you very much. And before this show, I thought that Israeli Miracle meant Hanukkah, but thank you.
Listen, that too. And listen, I will get all of the information. Hopefully I can send you guys out some stuff. I'd love you to try it. And be more than happy to come back anytime I can. Thank you so much.
Looking forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brien. Appreciate
Thanks, guys. We did it somehow, right?
We did. We just did it.
Thank you.
Bye.